What do our leaders need to actually look at being culturally intelligent? 4 different components of cultural intelligence. Firstly, CQ drive. So this is about your motivation. Are your leaders really, do they have an intrinsic or extrinsic interest in multicultural situations? And the reality of it is, there are many people who get given international roles who don't actually enjoy it. They find it hard. They find being on planes, jet lag, traveling really difficult. So drive is really kind of important to establish for your leaders. How interested are they? Because drive helps you also create ways that you can, when you are in situations which are difficult, for you to actually think of ways to come out of it. Knowledge. Knowledge is really around what are some of the cultural differences and similarities, and how does that kind of operate? What are some of the leadership styles available? So in each culture around the world, people know what a good leader looks like. It's what we call culturally implicit leadership theory. Now, they may not be able to articulate it, but they know what a good leader looks like. And every business in every part of the world is slightly different. How do we start meetings? How do we disagree? How do we greet each other? How do we thank? How do we negotiate? How many times do you find your leaders going into a negotiation with just one frame of reference and not understanding what are some of the nuances between that? How many trips do we need to take to actually build relationships? I was speaking at a conference on the Australia-Malaysia Business Council at the start of the year. We had 2 case studies of companies who came up to speak about their success. And I said to them, when I came up, 70% of joint ventures fail. In other words, 2/3 are not successful. It may be useful to actually talk to some of them who are not successful, because we can actually really learn quite a bit from them. So what knowledge do we actually need to be successful when working across cultures? Strategy is around planning, thinking, and checking. What's our strategy in going forward? What do we put in play? And does the strategy we have in this market, is that applicable to the other market? And finally, action. Action, at the end of the day, is where cultural intelligence comes into play. So you can know a lot about different cultures, you can be amazingly strategic, you can have great drive, but if you cannot execute, if you cannot implement it, then it falls over, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Let me give you an example of CQ in action. One of my clients, who's based here, had a team in Hyderabad. This was a new team he'd taken over, 120 people. First meeting where he had them all in the auditorium. And his first question was to the team, how many of you are immigrants to Hyderabad? Okay, I had a show of hands. Nearly 90% of them had come from outside of Hyderabad in India. He knew that. He said, good. First slide was a picture of his father and his mother leaving the port of Rotterdam in Holland to come to Australia with him as a baby. He said, I know what it's like to be an immigrant, because I too was an immigrant. He then showed the picture of his kids, showed the picture of his wife, showed him doing something, and his whole connection was around family. He spoke to that whole team based on, this is what he wanted, these were the values, this is how he wanted them to work. He told a great narrative. The story was really around family, being together, how we can achieve things together, and the importance of us all sticking together, and how he would be very much the father figure, which in that Indian context worked, because it's a very paternalistic organizational culture. Okay? May not have worked in other contexts. That is a sign of cultural intelligence. Somebody being able to think of the narrative, being able to think of the presentation, and how do I actually address my team in this particular context. So, the 4, drive, knowledge, strategy, and action. things that you need to get your leaders to be thinking of is how are they, what are their drivers? How do they be mindful? Mindfulness is such a critical part of cultural intelligence. How do they use their intuition? What are some of the things that they need to learn? How do they develop behavioral flexibility and cultural adaptability? So how do they learn how to adapt? Those would be some of the practices of good global leaders who are culturally intelligent.